And hello, everybody. This recording is for the 9th of February. We have ice storms in the area, so you are learning from home today. And we're going to be studying or learning about Between the Wars, Part 6, Economics in Europe and the United States. And we'll be looking at what the situation was in Europe and the United States after World War I up to the Great Depression. So I have a picture here, and this shows German children playing with marks, which is the equivalent of a German dollar bill, and they're making building block houses out of bundles and bundles and bundles of money. And no, these are not super rich kids. This is just showing you how worthless the German dollar was after World War I. They owed so much money, they had no way to pay it. So what they did is they just started printing more money, more money, more money, and the money was worthless. The German economy was crushed by Versailles, and it leads to all sorts of problems which are going to lead to a rise in fascism. Britain faces a massive war debt. Their factories are outdated. Wages weren't good. There were labor problems, and in 1926 it results in a general strike where several industries, all the major industries, go on strike, and the military has to be called in to put down the strikes. This is how bad the economy in Britain was. France was also pretty bad. It recovered more rapidly than the British due to the reparation money and some territories that they had gained. However, the political situation at times was very bad, and this hurt the economy. In America in the 1920s, the economy is booming. After a mild recession in 1919 and 1920, when all the soldiers come back and they're looking for jobs, America got rolling, and they started loaning and investing heavily in Europe, which helped the European economies. And the problem is that Europe's recovery rested on American prosperity, and things were about to turn very badly for the world, because you have the Great Depression that starts in 1928, 1929, and it's caused by a number of things. There are three major causes. You have overproduction and a lack of demand, and then the crash of the stock market. So overproduction, American factories were just churning up steak. And you have a picture here during the Depression of men waiting for bread. This is a soup line or a bread line, and they would basically had no money, had no job, and they would be relying on charity instead of work to get fed. What happens was the American economy is just churning out goods and churning out goods, and they start churning out goods so fast that they can't sell enough of them. This leads to overproduction and an excess of supply, which makes the prices plummet and go down. And what happens is, even at low prices, there's just such a large surplus of goods that the factories start laying off their workers. And then what happens is these laborers can no longer buy goods, which leads to a greater abundance of goods, further dwindling the price, the demand and the price, and resulting in more layoffs. And it had a ripple effect throughout the entire economy. And this is going on throughout the mid to late 1920s. The rumblings are starting to happen. Unemployment is going up. And at the same time, the stock market crashes because of some very risky endeavors by brokers and investors. And it got very risky, and the brokers demanded money from the investors, said you got to pay for these stocks and you have to cash out, and there just wasn't enough cash to go on. And that led for the prices to go way down in the stock market. This set a panic in industry, which was already shaky because of the overproduction, and in the banks, which then they began to call in loans. And now people started to want to go to the banks to get their money, and you had a general lack of cash going around, not an oversupply of goods, but no one has cash to buy these goods, and it led to a tremendous economic problem called the Great Depression. Once the stock market and the banks start failing, it's going to start affecting Europe, because all of Europe has been based on the United States economy. And you can see what happens in 1929 through 1932. You have stocks going up crazy because of investing. And then what happens in 1929? It crashes, and it really falls hard. By 1932, America's in bad shape. Look at the number of banks that are closing because they have no money. And look at the unemployment rate. with people not having jobs. And it gets worse in 1933. By 1933, about 25% of the people in the United States who are able to work aren't working. Look at how many banks close, almost as many in 1 year as had happened in the bad years of 29 through 32. And the stock market's dead, and the country has to go in a totally different direction. Now, the country never really recovers from pre-war. Look at 1929, before the crash, unemployment rate's 3.2, and what happens in 1933, Roosevelt is elected, and he brings in what's called a New Deal. And the New Deal prevents American disaster, but it does very little to revive the economy. The stock market doesn't really recover very much. And look at these unemployment rates. They're still around 20% throughout. In 1940, they start rising, but this is because war production is starting. The United States' industry is starting to shift to a wartime economy. And it takes World War II to get America out of this horrible economic situation compared to where employment was in 1929. Even with the New Deal, it doesn't do a lot to change the employment, but it does change the attitude in the country. The country was changing in certain ways, and we'll be looking at the New Deal when we return back to class on either on Wednesday or Thursday, and we'll be looking at Roosevelt. But this is basically what happens, and you see from the pictures the bad positions that the European economies are in. And what happens is this leads to a lack of trust of the governments and the democracies that exist in the United States and in Europe at this time. Germany was not under Hitler at the time. It was still a democracy. But this was a problem in Germany. Inflation, and here you have the labor strike and the military being called in to put down worker strikes, and then of course the Great Depression in the United States, and it becomes a worldwide depression because of the European economies being so tied to the American economies. And you can see in 1932 and 33 things are pretty bad. So that's it for today. You will have an ask question on google.com. It's worth a few points, and it will count for your attendance, and you need to hand that in today. Again, there will be no meeting. I will be available, though, for extra help. Have a great day.